All right. Um, I have started the recording also. Let me know if you have any objections to that. So people that are not here or yourself can look back at this. I will link it in the canvas, where you can view it. And hopefully this will help you getting to grips with things. Okay, so in this first lecture, I want to talk about introducing some ideas and talk about how the global economy functions from this perspective of the social division of labor. And I want to present some fundamental ideas of that. Yeah. So I have uploaded a reading, and that reading is a paper by Herbert Simon from 1991, which asks some very interesting questions, very pertinent questions to our modern world. He was way ahead of his time in some sense, asking these questions. And he really questioned, why should we look at the world from a market perspective? When we look at the world, I don't see a market. I see networks. I see institutions. And that is exactly what I want to develop in this module. I want to develop a perspective that is based on that, questioning the market perspective that we have made so common in economics. And to justify this, we have to go to a basic question, and that is, how is economic wealth created or generated? That is the basic question that we have to ask first and foremost. And what is then that? The first question that we have to answer then is, what the heck is economic wealth? Is that money? Is that capital? What is that? And the answer is much more mundane than that, and that is the stuff that is useful, the stuff that we make that is useful for us. You know? And it can also be called use value. Now, use value is a very old term, a very, very old term in economics. It comes from the 19th century. And it refers to the usefulness of commodities. So use value is embodied in mainly consumption goods, the stuff that we use. But there is indirect use value as well, namely, if I use iron ore to make a car, then the car is useful as a consumption good. But the iron ore indirectly is therefore useful as well, and therefore we should invest in digging up the iron ore and to process that iron ore and to smelt the iron out of the ore and make steel out of it and use that to build a car. So use value is transferable in some sense. The core is those consumption goods, but there are all these other goods, the intermediary goods, as we can call them, that as a consequence also have use value, but they're indirect. And there is a very major difference between the use value of the final consumption good and that of the intermediary input or the intermediary good. And that is important to realize. Now, it is an old term, as I said, and so a modern term for it is utility, but we know that consumption goods are the ones that show up in a utility function from your economics, from your market economics. We will use utility functions, of course, but we will also take into account that there is emanating from that utility a use value of those intermediary goods. And our 21st century economy is all about intermediary goods. Now, how is use value created? Use value is created as a cooperative process. We always have been doing that. The human condition, what defines a human? That is that we collectively create wealth. We collectively create the means to survive and to thrive. And this has been from the dawn of humanity, right? And some animal species have that, of course, as well. When we look at hominins, as we call that, or hominids, and various animal species like orangutans and the gorillas and the chimpanzees, they are also collaborating with each other. But in humans, that took a very different type of level. It was brought to an extremely high level of cooperation. And the question is, how do we do that? What makes us human? And there are two things that make us very special. And the first thing is that we found out that if we specialize in something, we become much better at it. We become really good at doing something when we train ourselves to do that. When you put in enough hours of training on any task, you become simply much better at it. And we call that nowadays education. But in the good old days, that was apprenticeship, or it was just growing up, so to say. But you are steered in a certain direction by your environment and by yourself, and you specialize in a certain task, and you become really good at it, and you become very productive. Now, this is called increasing returns to specialization. It is somewhat related to increasing returns to scale, but it is a weaker property. Yeah. So, so what happened? I'm sorry, I went too fast. The natural state of the human cooperative process is that we organize wealth creation through a social division of labor. We each do a certain task and we rely on others doing other tasks, and then we share the products of those tasks. This has always been at the foundation of a human society. So when you look at hunter-gatherer tribes that are still operating in certain parts of the world, those are the most primitive human societies. They're not primitive at all. They're very complex. And that is because they need to do that collaboration. They need to achieve that very high level of human cooperation. And they need to maintain that social division of labor. And they rely on very complex processes to not only achieve that social division of labor, but also to train the new members, the young members of the tribe in these various tasks, and that they tap into those increasing returns to specialization. And of course, the most complex society at the moment is what we call the global economy, which is a global society in some sense, of extremely complex procedures and processes. What is the form that this takes? That's the next question. How does the global economy look like, and what is the natural incarnation of that social division of labor? And there are two elements there that come about. And the first element is that it takes the form of a network, right? Because if you specialize in tasks, you have to exchange commodities with each other to make it work. You need those intermediary products to do your job, to produce something. I need a computer, I need Zoom software to do this lecture. Other people are developing that for me, and they're producing a computer, and I order that. And so a trade is made. I trade part of my salary for that computer. I also get Zoom software in the same way. And then I can deliver my product and I can make my living with that. I get a salary from the university for delivering a product like this lecture. Yeah. And we are guided in that through institutions. And institutions I understand as fictional narratives. These are stories that we tell each other, right? That we really believe, and this is a human quality that is unique to humanity, and that we believe fictions. Money is a fiction. It is just a story that we tell each other, that there is this substance called money, which is nothing but a number on a computer screen nowadays that you say, oh, this is my bank account. And this number we take as true. We believe that we own a certain substance that is represented by that money, and others believe that also. And so when I say, okay, let me give you a number of these imaginary things, send me your computer, it works. It's amazing that it works. And that is because we are all deluded in some sense, right? An animal is not deluded. A tree is a tree, and a tree is real. But when you say, oh, here, let me show you a computer screen with a number on it, they will not recognize that as something that has realistic value. Maybe the computer screen has, because it is a physical object, but what is shown on it is just a fiction. It is nonsense, right? So it's very interesting to realize that, and that our world is based on that, right? So we live in a world that has two main features that show up: networks, trade networks in particular, and institutions that guide all these things on the trade network. And I call that the architecture of the economy. So the architecture of the economy is the network infrastructure combined with these institutions. And the variety of network of the architecture is tremendous. We have gone through in economic history tremendous number of architectures, and those architectures evolve. And those architectures can lead to tremendous crashes. They can misfunction, and they can function very well. So 2008 is an example of misfunction of the architecture of the economy. And that is how I understand it to be. And I will talk about that in the next hour a little bit more. Let me show you a picture of a realistic part of the economy. And that is a local supply chain, an extremely local supply chain, where we see a retailer. Here he is. This retailer is the core of this whole picture. It is about the retailer, and he sells apples. But to get the apples, he needs to get that from somewhere, and he gets it from a wholesaler, and that wholesaler gets it from apple producers. Now, this is the same substance as these apples, but from an economic point of view, we are talking about different commodities. The apples that are produced by the farmer, the orchard, the owner of the orchard, is a different commodity from the apples that are sold by the wholesaler to the retailer, and it is different from the apples that are sold by the retailer to the consumers. These are three different products, 3 different economic commodities, and each have their own price. Each are valued in their own way. Now, this is not the end of it. There are many side flows to this, right? You have an extremely complex network here because apples also go to bakeries. Apples are used in baking pies and apple fritters and whatever. And these products and also apples themselves can go to food services, food banks, all the other things. And all of these are their own commodity again, because the usage is different, right? So in principle, we are looking at an overload of different economic commodities, although it is exactly the same substance. That is the beauty of using apples as an example. And you see here the complexity of the networks that emerge. This is just one good related to one tiny little retailer. This is a small business. This is one of those grocery shops. And we have an extremely complex structure here that shows that. Yeah. And in some sense, the core of the this network is this chain. This is the value generating chain. The chain from production, the producer of apples, going to the wholesaler, going to the retailer, going to the consumer. That is the chain of value generation. And the ultimate moment that the value is generated is when the retailer delivers the apples to the consumer. It is then that the value is realized. And this is very important for our understanding as well, that you realize that this value is only realized in one particular moment, namely at the end point of the whole process of delivering these apples to the supply chain to the consumers. The consumers are the ultimate receivers of this, and that is where the use value is created. All right, so let's talk about I see that let's talk a little bit more about architecture. We see here, we saw a little picture of one of those networks, right? Where are markets now? Where are the markets? Markets are really only at one spot in this network, and that is namely where the retailer meets the consumer. That is where the consumption good market is. All the other relationships are true network relationships. They are relationships that are negotiated. They are not relationships that are market relationships, right? We call them market relationships, but they're really network relationships. And the difference between a network relationship and a market relationship is that there is an interaction on that network relationship, and there's a negotiation really. There is a contract written. And so the contract is between the wholesaler and the retailer, for example. They negotiate a price and they come to an agreement in a certain way. And the retailer always goes to the same wholesaler for the apples. Right? It is a long-term, long-standing relationship. This is not a fleeting relationship with regard to like a market relationship, a temporal relationship. And the second element is, of course, those institutions. There are strict rules that prescribe how these parties interact. Everybody takes the price mechanism as given. They negotiate about the price, and that is the main thing that they negotiate about. It is not about a negotiation about something else. And so what we call the governance of that network is something that is really guided by a set of very restrictive institutions, right? And if you deviate from those institutions, you lose trust and trustworthiness, and you might not make a deal. You might undermine your business. Yeah. Now, Brexit, when you are seeing at the moment the consequences of Brexit. Brexit goes to the core of the governance of how we trade. All kinds of rules are completely overturned, and enormous processes have to be satisfied now. And these processes are very costly and very problematic, resulting in tremendous transaction costs. And that undermines then the whole functionality of these trade infrastructures, these networks. And that is exactly what we see at the moment. So underlying all of this is a social division of labor, right? So the social division of labor is expressing itself in some sense in this production network, this trade network, those institutions. Yeah. But it is really the social division of labor that is at the foundation of this. The wealth is generated in that social division of labor. And it is this underlying all of this, right? And so we can study those networks and we can deduce from those networks what the social division of labor is. And that is also the mathematical theory that I will develop later on in this module. I will look at a network and say, okay, now how can you deduce from this a mathematical matrix representation of the social division of labor? So the network can be expressed in a numerical model. All right, let's dwell a little bit on the main theory. And the main theory can be stated as in one line, and that line is here. Economic wealth is created through a social division of labor. That's the theory. Nothing more, nothing less. But then you go deeper and deeper from this, because what is economic wealth? Use value. Well, where is that going to? The economic goods. What is social division of labor? Those are specialized tasks related to producing economic goods. How is that done then? How do they do that? How do you socially organize that? So we peel this as a kind of onion, layer by layer. We go through this process of building a theory. Yeah, and that's what I will do. Let me start off with a little bit of history of this basic idea, this one-line theory. Where is it coming from? The ancient Greeks already expressed this. The ancient Greeks, in particular Plato, in his dialogue Republic. In Republic, he's talking about what good governance is. And in that process of talking about good governance, he's talking about how the polis functions. And the polis is the Greek nation state, the city state, how that functions. And of course, that functioning is very much based on having slaves, for example. It's a slave-based economy that he's talking about. Successors to Plato, Xenophon and Aristotle in particular, developed these ideas further. And those formed the first foundations for this idea. Now, then for a long time, this was an abandoned idea. The theory was not further developed very much until the 19th century, or the 18th century, I must say. The 18th century with its Enlightenment, ultimately leading to Adam Smith writing down ideas about normal life, in some sense, and creating in that process something he called political economy. And this was the first idea of that there should be a separate field of study, namely economics. And at that foundation of that field of political economy is this idea of the social division of labor again. And it's a very natural idea. This was taken up by other political economists from the 19th century, in particular Charles Babbage, who described production processes in corporations. David Ricardo, who has trade theories mainly developed, and Karl Marx, who developed the most comprehensive classical political economic perspective on the functioning of economies, market economies in particular. Then it was time for market theory of value to be developed, and the idea of the social division of labor went completely back in importance. It went to the background. Economists all were in agreement that there was a social division of labor, but it was not important. Why would you bother about that? And only recently, work mainly by Xiaoying Yang brought this to further development, and he developed a mathematical framework in which this is expressed, and he used that for that a new concept of consumer producer, as it is called, an economic agent that combines consumption with production, consumptive abilities represented by a utility function, and productive abilities represented by a production function. And they work together in this little unit, right? You produce in order to consume. So it brought about a new perspective. And we will base our approach on this. We will develop a model of a consumer producer, and this will be the main element of interest that drives our approach to social division of labor. All right. So before I continue, are there any questions? I did not see any remarks popping up or questions. And I assume I just drag on, I just talk on. I hope it's okay. Let me know if you have any questions. You want to stop me, do that. Just type your questions and or turn on your microphone and ask, no problem. All right. So what I will do is, the next step is to talk a little bit about the mechanism of wealth creation through a social division of labor. I will dig a little bit deeper. I will peel back the onion, so to say. So what are the mechanics of economic wealth generation based on the social division of labor? There are three sources to economic wealth. And that we already talked a little bit about that, but I talked about the expression that it takes. I talked about networks, I talked about institutions, but there are three underlying principles, sources for the social division of labor. So it is deeper than the social division of labor. These sources cause the social division of labor. Yeah. The first source is that of increasing returns to specialization that I already talked about. Namely, if I become better at a task by repeating it, by learning it, by studying it, by making it my own. That increases my productivity tremendously, and that allows me to specialize at a very high level of competence and productivity. Then the second source is the gains from trade principle that you know from standard economics between diversified traders. I specialize as a baker, another person specializes as a cobbler, and we trade bread for shoes or something like that. And we gain, both of us, we gain because we can mix it up. We both need shoes, we both need bread, and that makes us better off. that gains from trade principle is at the foundation of allowing people to specialize in some sense. However, we need rules. We need to know how we interact with each other. We need to know where we meet. So we have to know where a marketplace is. We have to know what the rules are. We have to know whether there is an intermediary means of trade, like money, whether there is a standardized way of weighing goods, how much of bread do I get when I have a contract. All those things are important. The quality of the goods need to be assessed. There's all kinds of guidance for that. All these things have to be done. Institutions are very, very important. Now, in neoclassical economics, the economics you know, the issue is that only source two is really developed. This trade theory of the mutual gains from trade. Now, when we've generated this wealth, how are we dividing that? And the answer is, in our economies throughout history, it has always been done through that social division of labor as well. We have compensation for these specialized individuals that operate in the social division of labor, right? They sell whatever they produce, and they sell them to other parties in the social division of labor as intermediary goods, for example, or they sell them to consumers who are also, by the way, participants in the social division of labor. Yeah. So what then determines those prices, those exchange values, as they're also called, that determine this income distribution that you then get, the division of wealth that is generated? How is it allocated over this social division of labor? Well, that depends on the rules, what you use, and how strong you are in negotiation, if it comes to negotiation. But there are also rules. There are silent rules that we use. We compare ourselves with others, and I call that balancedness. So if I'm in a certain position in social division of labor, I'm a baker, I compare myself to other professionals in the city economy. I compare myself to my neighbor, and my neighbor might be a cobbler, and I can compare myself with what his income is. And I say, well, I would like to have at least that income. And so you get a social understanding, you get social classes, you get a social structure in society, and rules emerge from that people in similar positions, at least according to their ideas, these are all fictions, similar positions would need similar compensation. In modern terms, it's called competitiveness, right? So competition leads to balancedness between positions, and this is a major force in the pricing of commodities in our economy. All right. I think we need a little break for a moment, just to gather some thoughts. Type in your questions if you want. I will take a few minutes, and then we will move on to the next, since we've completed the block of half an hour. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's take a few minutes. I will, let's take 3 or 4 minutes. We will return in 7 or 8 after the hour. All right. Let's continue. I did not get any questions, so I assume it is all crystal clear. All right. Let's talk a little bit about those socioeconomic institutions. They are extremely important for the functionality of our economy. It's remarkable how well we do this as a human species. We trust each other tremendously. We have a very complex social division of labor, very deep social division of labor, very specialized positions. We create tremendous wealth together. We create extremely complex products as a consequence. And we do that through very long chains of trade, of interaction in those networks. How do we do that? Well, we have wonderful institutions. We are tremendously flexible in our institutions as well. We adapt our institutions to respond to issues that emerge. And it's remarkable how well we do that, you know. So what is at the foundation of that? That is something that has been studied by evolutionary biologists and by anthropologists, and that is our brain. What makes the human species unique is the social brain that we have. We are able to interact with each other, and we are able to interact with quite a few people. We can remember up to 150 names and faces of people. Probably even more than that. And this allows us to do tremendously well with regard to interacting with each other. And we have evolved as such. Our brain is big because we used it as this instrument for sociality, for interaction, for collaboration. And fossils that have been found of hominin species confirm that, right? So early hominins had a relatively small brain, and that developed over time. And only the most successful species that emerged, the Homo sapiens, us, brought that to this level of the social vision of labor. We were able to do that to the highest level. And we are able to create the most complex institutions, stories that we tell each other, stories that you know that you have to submit to somebody who is your boss, or that you have to use this weird substance called money to trade, that you should stick to rules in order to do certain things. All these things are remarkable when you think about it. Animals will not be able even to do this. And when you, a great story or expression of that is this video that I posted on Canvas of that. Okay, so the social brain has also limitations. We are not endlessly able. We are not clairvoyant, and we're not able to go beyond a certain limit. So there's boundedness to our abilities. That is called bounded rationality. How do we overcome that? Well, we overcome that by inventing rules that we all abide by, right? And that is what I call institutional governance, right? We overcome our limitations by creating a system of rules that we follow and that guides our human community completely, right? So we get an institutional governance system that creates this society, and that we can maintain the social division of labor and make it even more complex and even can create much more wealth than we normally would do. Yeah. Now, what are those institutions? And I take it very, very broadly, this set of institutions. It is something that is tremendously rich, and very unimportant things that we don't think normally about are very important, like the handshake, for example. A handshake is a tremendous instrument to seal economic deals. We shake on it, right? And it is a Western invention. It is a European invention, and it is now exported worldwide. We make deals, we write contracts by handshake. It's just a cultural expression. It is culture, right? And we talk to each other. We use a common language. English is now a global language. And this global language we use in a lot of trades. And language is extremely important, and that it is common to us is extremely important. Let's narrow it down a little bit more to economics. We need to recognize a certain set of economic goods, otherwise we cannot use them. They cannot be used as inputs and outputs in a system of based on the social division of labor. We need to recognize those inputs and outputs collectively. We have to say, yes, those are apples, and we know what apples are. And there's a common understanding of what an apple is, and how it smells, how it tastes, what nutritional value it has, how we can use it, whether we can bake an apple cake with it or not, whether what the lifespan is of an apple, whether it will rot quickly, and so on. These are all understandings, and we have a social understanding of that. And that means there's a social understanding of use value. Use value is not purely subjective. Use value is also objective. And that was recognized by the classical political economists of the 19th century and was abandoned by the market economists of the 20th century, because they went into this theory that everything should be based on a subjective understanding. However, at the foundation of our economy is and remains a collective understanding, a social understanding of what goods are. And some of us might like Apple more than others, and that is perfectly okay, and we will be able to express that. But still, at the foundation is that social understanding. Then very closely related to this is that we need a set of socioeconomic roles that we recognize collectively, collaboratively, cooperatively. We know what a farmer does. We know what a baker does. We know what a miller does. Those are well-described professions. Those are well-described socioeconomic roles. And we know what to expect. And when we go into a shop and it says bakery on the top, we have expectations. And if those expectations are not met, then we have a problem. Then we have a problem with trust. And trust is at the foundation of all of this. Trust is our collective understanding of these institutions and what to expect from them. Finally, very, very important from an economic point of view is that we know our exchange mechanisms, that they are based on collective behavioral rules, and those institutions are well described. Yeah. So that is very important. Yeah. Are there any questions about this? All right, so even though the social division of labor is that based on individuals doing their stuff, it is extremely social, and it is based on those institutions. Without those institutions, it's not working, right? We need to know what we're doing, and it needs to be done. We need to know at a higher level. We need to know with our collective understanding, right? We need to know beyond our social brain. Right? So social division of labor is founded on doing things with socially recognized inputs and outputs. And we need to know that we can trade these things. That is very important. If they're not tradable, then we have an issue. So even though we socially recognize clean water as an input for certain things, in some cases, it might not be a tradable good. Clean air, a healthy environment, those are at the forefront now of our environmental crisis. Those are socially recognized, but they are not tradable. We cannot buy clean air, right? So there are these things that we cannot trade. Our social division of labor is not based on them, right? We are not taking care of our environment because our environment is not tradable, right? We cannot say, oh, let's produce clean environment. We need to somehow make it tradable. And of course, what is traded is, for example, pollution rights. We can create markets for pollution rights. But that is a negation of, in some sense, of the environment. It is the opposite. It is the right to pollute, the right to take away environment. That is tradable, but not the environment itself. And that is why the trading pollution rights ultimately is not the answer to cleaning up the pollution and the CO2 and getting things right with regard to our environment. All right. I'm dwelling a little bit further on increasing returns to specialization. Again, our increasing returns to specialization focuses on professions. So we socialize our increasing returns to specialization, and we socialize it even further. We have invented systems to teach specialization. We call it education. So here we are training as economists, and we become productive in a certain way, and we know certain things, and we don't know other things. So we specialize, and it takes us a long time to specialize. It's a tremendous investment, right? Humans take tremendous time to grow up and to become fully functional members of society, right? You can easily count 20 to 25 years for a person to grow up and become a full member of society. Now, that's a tremendous investment. And society is doing that. We need to do that in order to make that social division of labor work. And you see also over history that the systems of education have tremendously become more complex, and it has become longer and longer to learn things. Yeah. All right. So at the core is to use this thing called increasing returns to specialization, becoming more productive at a certain task, and that what comes out of that task needs to be socially recognized. When you're a baker, you bake bread. That bread is a socially recognized commodity, and your task is socially recognized. And the way that you do it, the methods that you use are also socially recognized, and we can learn them in that way. We learn them in a social environment, we learn them in school, we learn them in a workshop as an apprentice, and so on. So those things are done collectively. I want to emphasize that increasing returns to specialization is a weaker notion than increasing returns to scale. So we will talk about the technicalities of that in week 4, I think. We will see that later on. The gains from trade principle, you know very well. Our social division of labor is completely based on this. If there were no mutual gains from trade, there would not be a social division of labor. Right? That is why we are allowed to specialize. Yeah? And that is based on a very individualistic kind of property even though we all have it. So it is in some sense a human trait. We like mixed bundles of goods. We like to have a roof over our heads. We like to have clothing on our backs. We like to have food in our belly. And we like to have a nice, good health service to take care of us when we get ill. So all of these things are important. And then the luxury goods, we like to use a lot of them, and we like to have furniture, we like to have computers, we like to have TVs and radios and iPhones and all that stuff. We like to mix it up. That gives us our greatest pleasure. And this allows us to have mutual gains from trade. Mutual gains from trade are based on what is called consumptive smoothing. Consumptive smoothing is usually introduced as a property of a utility function, and that is called convexity of the utility function. But it is really an individualization of something social, because we all want all of it, right? We all want that, to mix it up and to have everything. And that gives us the impetus, the idea to indeed create a social division of labor and to have this complex society of trade and wealth generation. If I only would like to eat potatoes and nothing else, no roof over my head, no clothing on my back, no healthcare service, but only eating potatoes, I would become a potato farmer, and that's it. I'm set for life. I'm super happy. I will just produce potatoes myself. I tap into my increasing returns to specialization, and I would be super happy. But that's not the case. I want the other things as well. And so somebody else has to produce clothing for me. Somebody else has to build a hut. And somebody else has to become the medicine man. Yeah? Those are, and that leads then to trade. That leads to me giving potatoes for bread, for the hut, for healthcare provision. So we all share in some sense. Yeah, and those are the mutual gains from trade. I will come back to this consumptive smoothing a little also when I talked about utility functions and the properties that we assume. Yeah. So trade networks are very important in relationship to the functioning of the social division of labor. Trade networks express the social division of labor. Social division of labor is embedded in trade networks, and the institutions are also embedded in those trade networks, namely how we trade with each other, how we interact with each other, how we build networks. All those things become part of the story, and those are the expressions of those underlying institutions that we have. The handshake, right? The handshake is used to build those networks. That's essentially what we have. That's the kind of society we have. Let's do an example. So I will conclude the lecture more or less with a very simple example of an extremely small tribe, a completely unrealistic tribe of Homo sapiens roaming the savannah, so to say. I assume there are only 4 members of a tribe. That is extremely small. It's completely unrealistic because real life tribes are much bigger. That's why we have this number of 150 faces and names that we can remember, because that is the standard size of a tribe in some sense. But this is computational, because we will do our computations with this, and we will see how all of this interacts with each other, and how institutions guide our social division of labor, and how we create wealth together. So we keep it an extremely simplistic society with 4 completely unrealistic and silly in some sense. We have 2 goods. Those are socially recognized as goods: meat and vegetables. And in principle, we have then 2 professions. Each member of our tribe can specialize in producing meat, and they can be called hunters, or they can be specialized in finding vegetables and fruits. We talk about a primitive tribe, so there's no farming. We assume these are gatherers. So we have hunters and gatherers. And then we have a third possibility, is somebody can just isolate from the tribe and try to survive by him or herself and become autarkic, as we call that. That's a third possible role. It's a silly role, because we will see that it is completely unproductive to be an autarkic person. Everybody is endowed with the same utility function. And I'm using here a simple, for computation purposes, nothing else, a simple Stone-Geary utility function, as it is called. That means when you plug in 0, you still have a positive number. If a bundle 0, 0 is still assigned the utility level of 2, as you can see, 1 times 2. And so it gives us a little bit more flexibility in some sense to do this. Now, from the productive point of view in this society, I'm listing the individuals and their productive ability. Some are more productive and some are less productive in their specialization. So this is based on individual traits. The common thing is the increasing returns to specialization. However bad you are at a certain thing, by exercising, by repeating, by learning, you can become better at it, right? And that is what our social division of labor is based upon, right? It is not based on talent. Nobody is talented to be a bureaucrat. Nevertheless, we are a huge number of bureaucrats in our society. Nobody really trains to be a bureaucrat even, right? But nevertheless, we have that, right? So hunters and gatherers, some people are more proficient at hunting, some other people are more proficient at gathering. Autarky is much lower productivity. And I just compute, I plug in this bundle that is generated by an autarkic person, 1 unit of X and 1 unit of Y, into the utility function to get a utility level of 2 times 3, that is 6. And that gives us an indication of, well, how well people are doing when they're in autarky. And that is not that great. Again, type in any questions you have here. Let me know. Now, how are we organizing our society? That's the big issue that I want to ask here. And there are 3 possibilities that I will look at. And society based on authority. We assign roles. We try to optimize the total social output of society, and then we equally divide whatever is produced. This is Soviet Union. This is North Korea in some sense, yeah, to have an equivalent. However, a lot of tribes were organized in this way. You can also, patriarchy is the normal term for that as well. Then you can have a household-based organization. 1 hunter and 1 gatherer form a household, and they share the production that they generate, the output that they generate. Again, based on equality. And finally, I introduce a much more complex form of organization, and that is self-organization through a competitive price mechanism, and that is the market mechanism. We introduce market prices for the goods, X and Y, meat and vegetables, and our production and consumption decisions will be guided by those prices. Yeah. I will go over each of these three models, and we do our computations, and we will see what emerges. And we see that even though the economy is completely described, the productive abilities in the economy are completely described by this table that I showed you on the previous slide, we get a wide variety of possible results. Let's first talk about patriarchy, right? I assign, based on some perceived notion of what we want, namely a maximal output, whatever that means, roles to the various people in my tribe. I assign people that should be hunters, as I assign people that should be gatherers. And then we equally divide whatever is produced in this tribe over the members. Yeah. This requires strong leadership. This requires a head of state or head of the tribe that completely enforces this. Yeah. Let's do that. If we do this, we see that if we assign the role hunter to individuals 1 and 2 and gatherer to individuals 3 and 4, we get the optimal output. And you can see that here, if we add it all up, I get 9 units of X and 9 units of Y. And I can equally divide that, and I divide that by 4, and I give everybody their equal share of 2 1/4 in each. And I plug that into the utility function, and I compute then my use value, so to say. And you see here that individuals are much well off than under autarky, so to say, right? So getting together and doing things together gives you tremendous utility. We are tapping into our increasing returns to specialization fully here. And we do that in a smart way by not treating individuals different from each other. Yeah. Let's move on to the other form of organization. That's a household economy. A household economy, I'm making households of 2 individuals only. That is a social rule. I introduce a social institution, namely the institution of a household. And those 2 individuals, they assume the role of a hunter and a gatherer. So I'm combining hunters and gatherers. Usually this was done also based on, of course, males and females. Males were usually hunters, females were usually gatherers. Not for all tribes in history, but for a lot of those tribes. And that created the opportunity to link also households to get offspring and get the next generation of tribesmen, so to say. Yeah. So this idea of household is not completely alien, but we are only looking at a household here from an economic point of view. I'm not going to look at it from a social point of view, as we can call that. So I assume household formation is completely voluntary, and it is simply driven by utility, simply driven by what household members can achieve for themselves. Yeah. Again, within a household, the generated output is divided equally. Let's go over the possible households that we can create out of in this tribe. We have 4 tribe members. We can combine them as pairs in an arbitrary way, and we can compute for every pair now an optimal social division of labor or optimal division of labor, household division of labor. We can compute the joint output and then compute the individual consumption based on equal division. And then we can compute the utility that results. Here we have our first example. If we combine individuals 1 and 2, both should be specializing in their best role. And that is leading us to an output level of 4,4, an individual consumption of 2,2, and plugging that into the utility function, that gives us a utility level of 12. Do the same for 1 and 3. There you see that the output level is a little bit higher because one is more proficient at hunting. He was in the wrong role in the household of 1 and 2. He was only doing the gathering there because 2 was really bad at gathering. So he is underutilized in some sense. However, in a household with 3, he can be utilized fully, and we have he can achieve an output of 5. And that means we have a consumption of 2.5 and 2 per individual, leading to a utility level of 14. 1 and 4 can even increase further because 4 is very good at gathering. And so we get a joint output level 5.5, and we compute a utility level 15.75. 2 and 3 is 4 and 4, utility level 12. 2 and 4, 4, 5, 2.5 is 13.5. And finally, 3 and 4, when they combine, their productivity is not great, so they only achieve an individual utility level of 10. Yeah. All right. Who should be getting together? If we are only guided by individual values, then you see 1 and 4 should definitely get together. They will naturally form a household. And then the leftover pair is 2 and 3. So here we see a society in which there emerges inequality. Even though this is not a society based on pricing, the price mechanism is based on social rule of forming households and equal division in the household. Nevertheless, we get rich households and poor households, households with very productive individuals and with less productive individuals. Yeah. All right. The final model that we had was that of a competitive market economy. Let's assume there are markets that guide the decisions in this economy. Let's assign a price to any good. And we only have one price, right? So that is, there's only one market for each good. That's a very important assumption. So there's a unique price, and that price guides all decisions for that particular commodity. This immediately leads to a dichotomy, as we call that, of decisions. First of all, agents will select a production plan to maximize their income under the given prices. Income maximization is the goal. And that income is then used to buy commodities. So it's a two-step process in some sense. And this is what naturally evolves in an economy under price mechanism. So the introduction of the price mechanism by itself results immediately into this dichotomy of decisions. Let's be more precise. Let's call the price of fruit and vegetables, the commodity Y, P. And that is then expressed in units of meat. So the price of meat is 1, and the price of fruit vegetables is P. This means that meat is used as what is called a numeraire, money. Now, if we then compute demand, we have a demand function coming from the optimization of the utility function under the budget constraint, given the income, we get these demand functions. I refer to your undergraduate microeconomics for computing this. Yeah, we will do exercises with this later on, but I don't want to do them here. We just take this as given. Now, given the price P, I can compute a configuration that emerges in the economy, a social division of labor. I can therefore compute the supply that is generated, because it's all about income maximization, of course, right? So everybody assumes a role in maximizing their income. And given the generated incomes, then we can compute using this demand function, the consumption bundles. And then we have to check whether actually the consumption is equal to the supply, right? This is quite a complex computation. This is not easy, not even with this tiny little market, this tiny little tribe of 4 individuals. It's quite a lot of work, very dull, very tedious. You can program it in a computer. That would be the smartest thing to do. I went through that, and what is the result? The result is this. The result is that we have an equilibrium price of P is equal to 13 divided by 17. Not a very nice number, but economics is never that nice, even when you create examples like this. Then you can compute the generated incomes under that price. You can optimize the decisions for consumption based on the demand function that we have. And then we can compute the utility that is generated for every individual. So we see here, under this equilibrium price, individual 1 becomes a hunter, will generate 5 units of meat, sells it on the market. The meat price is 1 because it's a numeraire, and he will generate an income of 5. He will use that to buy stuff, and the consumption plan is computed there, 2.76, 2.92. We plug that into the utility function, and it leads to a utility level of 18.5. Individual 2 also becomes a hunter, generating an income of 4. Consumption plan is given there, and the utility generated is 13.9. Person 3 becomes a gatherer, generates an income of 4 times the price, that is 13 divided by 17, that's 3.06. Uses that income to purchase goods on the market, and leads to a consumption plan is given there and a utility level of 10.2. Finally, person 4 also becomes a gatherer and generates therefore higher income, 3.82, and can purchase these goods again, and leads to a utility level of 13.2. Note that if you add up all those consumption plans, you get exactly the generated output in this economy. You get 9 units of X are purchased or consumed, and 9 units of Y are consumed. You can check that. You see here that we get exactly the same social division of labor as we had under a dictatorship, under patriarchy. But we get the allocation of what is produced is totally different. There's no equal allocation. It is a market allocation, and that is based on purchasing power, and that is based on your ability to generate income. And that means you have a much more unequal division of that. So we've seen here a great example, and you see here that we see here that things very much function based on those institutions. Different institutions, different outcomes, even different specializations, different design of society. I'm not even talking about technological innovation here. I'm talking about just the institutional rules. So technology, I will talk about in the next lecture a little bit more, and the trade networks that emerge. Yeah. So wealth creation and allocation are completely determined by the architecture of the economy. That's the main lesson that we have here. Next, I want to go to the real world, and I will talk about the crisis of 2008 as a great example of how it functions in reality. Yeah. So let's take a 5-minute break, at least. Let's return 5 to 4 for the second lecture.